This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm going to see if I can get the slides. There we go. Thank you for having me, everyone, and thank you for coming. Today I want to talk about something that I've been working on for quite a long time, and that is whales. But specifically about a new movement that's happening globally that's called the Whale Sanctuary Movement. And I want to tell you about why whale sanctuaries are so important. Now, this is my second time here. I am so happy to be back. So, in 2015, I was here, and I gave a talk on dolphin brains, an alternative to complex intelligence in primates. And it was all about what we know about the big, complex brains of dolphins and whales, and how they compare to our own, and what are they doing with those big brains. So today, I'm here to tell you about some of the work that my colleagues and I have been doing since then. And I want to start off with this slide. This is Tokitae, also known by her stage name Lolita. Does anybody know who she is? Yeah, everybody knows who she is. She's known around the world, and she unfortunately passed away on August 18th at the age of 57 at the Miami Seaquarium. And at the time that she died, there were a team of veterinarians and trainers who were trying to prepare her to go back to her natal waters in the Pacific Northwest. And that, unfortunately, was not to be. She had numerous conditions, numerous illnesses. They really tried, but it didn't happen. So just want to give you, sort of tell you what Tokitae means to everyone in this field. Today I'm going to start by talking about killer whales, or orcas. That's who Tokitae was. And I could stand here and talk about orcas till the cows come home. And you would all want to be, can we leave now? But I'm just going to give you a list, sort of a greatest hits list of some of the things about orcas that are just phenomenal. Well, the thing that attracted me to them originally was their big, complex brains. Their brains are 2.5 times the size you'd expect for even an animal of that body size. And the complexity of their brain is really something to write home about. Now, these are also cultural animals. And 20 years ago, to even talk about culture in other animals, right, you'd be laughed off the stage. And now we know many animals have cultures. They have dialects, different ways of feeding themselves, different ways of doing things, different cultural traditions. And orcas are like that. They have long juvenile periods. They spend a long time learning how to be a proper orca. And they are very bonded with their mother and their family and their social group. They have lifelong social bonds. In some groups of orcas, the males stay with their mom their whole life. So talk about not getting out of the basement. They stay with their moms the whole life. And if something happens to mom, it's so serious that if he doesn't get adopted by another member of the pod, he might die of depression, and it's happened. So we're talking about very, very close-knit families. They're also matrilineal, and they have menopause. And they think that this is so that the grandmothers who stop reproducing themselves can help with raising the grandchildren. And this is what has been observed. This all sounds familiar, doesn't it? They live in very complex social networks, and they have very sophisticated communication abilities. And so it will be a while before we really can figure out what they're saying, but with the new techniques in AI, I think that there may be some breakthroughs in the future. Now to the issue at hand. Since I've been here in 2015, there have been 7 orca deaths at SeaWorld in Orlando, in San Diego, and San Antonio. And as you can see, with the age at death, the highest is 39. And some of them are as low as 3 months or 7, 19, 21. These animals don't live long in marine parks. How big is this problem? What is the scope of this problem? Well, how many orcas are in captivity around the world? Well, now that Tokitae has passed, there are 18 left in the United States. There's one in Argentina. His name is Kashimenk. He's the only orca there. There is one in Russia. There's only one because the rest of them passed. They all died. So we have a little 11-year-old female orca there who is now pregnant. I have to revise this. Spain, 4, well, no, now there's 3. One died this week. There's a family there, a family of 4, held at Marineland Antibes. And one of them, who was kind of sickly his whole life, was 12 years old, he died. I'll tell you a little bit more about them later. In China, there are about 15. In Japan, about 7. We really don't know, but there are quite a few. Globally, probably 50 to 55 in captivity. And altogether, there are about 3,500 cetaceans, dolphins, whales, and porpoises, held in marine parks in concrete tanks, mainly around the world. On the left, you see the beluga whale, and on the right, the bottlenose dolphin. Now I want to tell you a little bit about why I think it's so important that we get these animals out of the tanks. And it's not an opinion. It's not because I don't like to see them there. It's because the science demands that we do something about this. Let's look at some statistics. SeaWorld has maintained that the maximum lifespan of orcas, both in the wild and in the tanks, is 35. That's untrue. Data from free-ranging populations off the Pacific Northwest show that females can live to 80 to 90, and males 50 to 60. Maximum, not average, but maximum. Captive orcas of either sex rarely live longer than 30 years, and most of them die in their teens and 20s. So that's why SeaWorld likes to tell you that they only live to 35, but they live a lot longer than that, or can. 92% of orcas held at SeaWorld have died by the age of 25. Let's look at survivorship. Now, what is survivorship? It's really just the probability of surviving to a particular age. In 2015, there was an interesting study that showed that, looked at the survivorship of captive orcas. And since 1985, there have been improvements. In other words, more orcas are surviving to older ages. But the survival rates still remain poor compared to free-ranging orcas. Survivorship in the US is significantly better than in facilities outside the US, like in China and Japan. China and Japan are latecomers to this. They got on board because they saw how popular and lucrative it was to have dolphins and whales in marine parks. And now they've got one on every corner practically, something like 82 in China. And they have to populate them, and they typically populate them with dolphins and whales that they take from the ocean. Now, I want to take a look at infant mortality statistics. This is something that I've been doing some research on. This is very interesting. Of 103 orcas who have been in captivity globally since 1985, 73 have already died, with 48 dying in their first year. Therefore, orca birth rates and infant mortality rates have been, at best, the same or only slightly better in captivity than in the wild. Now, I want you to think about that. In captivity, there's not supposed to be any pollution, ship strikes. You get fed every day, and you've got veterinarians taking care of you. But why isn't the captive orca infant mortality rate much lower in captivity than in the wild? It should be a whole lot lower, but it's not. In the wild, you do have problems with getting fed, pollution, ship strikes, that you don't have a doctor on call. And yet, the best marine parks can do for infant mortality is match that in the wild. That tells you something's not adding up here. Let's take a look at the concept of welfare. It's very interesting. Everyone's got a different notion about it, but let's just see if we can sort of agree on a few aspects of welfare. The most widely accepted definition of animal welfare is that it comprises both the body and the mind, and the extent to which its nature is satisfied. I like that because it recognizes that individuals of different species have different natures because of their evolutionary history, their adaptations. Your nature is different than that of a rhinoceros, okay? So what you need to thrive might be a little different than what a rhinoceros needs to thrive. There's overlap for sure, but if I want you to be happy and thrive, I need to know who you are. In the past, welfare was defined by the absence of negative states. So people will go in and say, is the animal hungry? No? Okay, good, check. Is the animal in pain? No? Okay, good, check. But more recently, scientists have begun to realize that welfare includes positive states. Your well-being is not just the absence of hunger or the absence of pain, it's your ability to feel joy, to bond, to play, to explore, all of these things that make life worth living. And that's the same for whales. And feelings, too, are central to welfare concepts. More progressive welfare ideas starting to realize that not only do animals have feelings, but they need challenges. They need to exercise choice and autonomy. I always tell people, what if somebody put you up in the fanciest hotel in the world? Somebody slipped your favorite food under the door every day. If you got sick, the doctor came in and took care of you, but you could never leave. You'd jump out the window. After a while, you would. Because there's nothing to do, and there's no choice in the matter. And it's the same thing for these animals. So there are three central questions about captive wild animal welfare that we should ask ourselves. The first one is, who are you? You can go to any place, a zoo, a marine park, a lab, a sanctuary, a shelter. First thing you want to do is want to understand, who are you? Not only who are you as an individual, but who are you as a member of your species? And you want to then ask the question, what do you need to thrive? From individual differences to the nature of the species. So what a whale might need to thrive might be a little bit different than what you need to thrive. There's overlap, but whales do not need to go to school, but they do need to be with their families, just like you and me. And so there's overlap. There's similar and different, both at the same time. And then the final question is, given who you are, given what you need to thrive, do you have the opportunity to thrive where you are? Does the captive environment afford you the opportunity to live like a member of your species, apart from anthropocentric biases? In other words, not what we think is a good life for an orca, but what does an orca think is a good life? And so you have to put yourself in the mind of the animal. It's not about us. So now I want to tell you about the science of welfare of captive orcas. These are the things that happen to orcas in captivity. First, I'm going to talk about infections, systemic infections, opportunistic infections. Many of the infections captive orcas succumb to are opportunistic, meaning that they are generally harmless, but they cause disease under certain circumstances. If you get a cold during final exams, I always tell my students, it's an opportunistic infection. You're stressed, and you happen to get a cold at the same time. Well, imagine instead of getting a cold, you get pneumonia or encephalitis or something like that. All of these are due to weakened immune systems, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Common causes of death in orcas are pneumonia, gastrointestinal disease, meningitis, encephalitis, and candidiasis. Okay? Now, it's not that wild orcas don't get pneumonia, but why are they getting pneumonia in the tanks? Why? So many of these incidents of death are correlated with antibiotic and antifungal resistance brought about by prophylactic over-medicating. What that means is that marine parks know that these animals are not healthy. They don't want to lose them, and so they pack them with antifungal and antibiotic medications. They put it in the fish, the dead fish, and then they drop the dead fish in the mouth. And so what happens when they do get one of these diseases, they're often resistant. And that's one of the problems that you see. It's something that I think probably happened to Tillicum in SeaWorld Orlando. By the time he was being pumped with all kinds of medications, by the time he actually got sick with pneumonia, they couldn't find anything to help him. Oral stereotypies and dental disease are a big deal for captive orcas. Now, what is a stereotypy? Stereotypy is a persistent, repetitive action. It has no purpose, right? It's associated with psychological distress and poor well-being. Examples are animals pacing back and forth, but also in human beings, right? Who may have mental problems or disabilities. You'll see them, rocking or hitting their head or doing this, all kinds of things over and over and over again. That's a stereotypy. One of the most common stereotypies in captive orcas is repeated biting on the tank surface and the gates. So, just grinding and grinding their teeth on hard surfaces until they look like what you see in that picture. Now, that's the lower jaw of a captive orca, and there are no teeth there. They're just nubs. And then what has to happen is you have to drill them to keep them clean to prevent systemic infection. And you have to drill them all the time. And so that's what a captive orca's lower jaw looks like. Over 60% of captive orcas in the United States and Spain have fractured mandibular teeth, and 24% of them exhibit major to extreme tooth wear down to the gums. You don't see this in the wild. The only time you see dental wear in orcas in the wild is in specific communities of orcas who happen to prey upon fish that have very rough skin or scales, okay? But it's not due to a stereotypy, it's just due to the wear and tear of what they eat. These behaviors lead to chronic dental pathologies and provide a pathway for systemic disease. And then I want to tell you about self-injurious behaviors and other abnormal behaviors. I'm just going to hold there. As you can see, this orca, this was a young male orca at SeaWorld San Diego. And you can see his chin, his lower mandible, there's a whole chunk missing. He got into a fight with another orca, and that's what happened. And that's what happens when you are stuck in a tank with somebody who you don't get along with, and there's nowhere to go. Where are you going to disperse to? So, let's look at self-harm and hyperaggression. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon. On the left is Hugo. Hugo used to be at the Miami Seaquarium with Tokitae. He was captured from the wild, and when he was put in captivity, he kept bashing his head against the side of the tank, and he eventually died of an aneurysm. In the middle is Morgan. She's a female orca who is at Loro Parque in Spain. Now, she's not in the water, is she? She's on the side of the tank. Why? Because she's trying to get away from aggressive male orcas in her tank. So she beaches herself, goes on the concrete, because there's nowhere to go. And finally, Corky and Candu. Several years ago, these two females were performing, again at SeaWorld, and something happened, and they ran into each other, and Candu bled out, as you can see there, and she died. She died in front of her calf. Now, the poignancy of this is that Corky, who actually did collide with Candu, adopted Candu's calf because she didn't have a mother anymore. But these are the kinds of things that you see in the tanks that tell you that there is something wrong. And let me ask you this. Shouldn't captive orcas be living long, healthy lives? They have food, they have water, fresh, clean water, 24/7 dental care. Shouldn't they be the ones living the longest, healthiest lives of all? Why aren't they? Well, some colleagues and I sought to answer this question, and I think it's very interesting because I think the answer can be found in a mountain of studies that have been done on the effects of stress on the brain and physiology. Now, stress, as you know, is an organism's response to a situation where you deviate from a state of optimal functioning. And then your body is going to try to correct that and get back to something called homeostasis. And all of us sitting here today, all the animals in the world, they all have exactly the same brain and body mechanisms for dealing with stress. Why? Because it works so well. Because the stress response system works so well that there's no need to improve it. It just, every species has it. And it's shared across mammals and vertebrates. Orcas and other cetaceans, too, share these same brain mechanisms involved in mounting a stress response. This figure is from a paper of ours from 2021 in which we did cross-section drawings through the brains of 4 different species: elephants, bottlenose dolphin, human, rat. From the big to the little, right? But in fact, what we did is color code some of the important structures in the brain that's involved with emotions and mounting a stress response. And as you can see, every single one of these brains has a gray area. Everyone has a red, everyone has a blue, everyone has a green. They may be in different proportions, but they're all there. This is, in scientific terms, what's known as a highly conserved system, meaning that it works, and it works in everybody in exactly the same way. And there's a mountain of scientific evidence for this. So what happens when you're stressed, not just you, but an orca, a rat, a cat, a dog, is that when you are in a stress situation, brain mechanisms cause a physiological response known as fight or flight. And some of you may have heard of this. Now, what happens is that a part of the brain called the hypothalamus sends chemicals to the pituitary, and the pituitary sends chemicals out of the brain to the adrenal glands, sitting there on top of your kidneys. And those adrenal glands send out stress hormones, adrenaline, you all know that, right? And cortisol. And these hormones allow you to deal with the immediate stress. You're walking down a dark alley and somebody approaches you. This kicks in. So after that acute stress, the system then ramps down through a series of feedback circuits. But what if the stress doesn't go away? What if you're living with that stress day after day after day? the system stays ramped up, eventually causing damage to the brain and the immune system. And what are the effects? Behavioral dysregulation, stereotypies, and opportunistic infections. Just what we see in captive orcas and other cetaceans. And we know this from decades of experimental work with rats and mice and other animals where they actually did the studies that showed that this mechanism kicks in, and if the stress continues, it has very predictable effects upon the body and the brain. Goes back into the brain. So the question is, can adaptation to 52 million years in the ocean be circumvented by an artificial anthropocentric environment? That's really the question we have to ask ourselves. It's not about, oh, those guys over there at SeaWorld, I don't know what they're doing, or they're evil, or they're this or that. It's not about that. It's about the simple question, can anybody circumvent 52 million years of evolution? Can we do better? You bet we can. We can do better in general by recognizing and respecting the nature of these whales. Do not try to fit a square peg into a round hole. It doesn't fit, it never will. That causes chronic stress. Adopt the perspective of the whale, not the human. Some people who have orcas and other whales in captivity, they feed them and they say, look how fortunate those whales are. They don't have to hunt anymore. They want to hunt. Their brains evolved to have that stimulation, and you've taken that away from them. They're not like us. They don't want to have their food served to them. They want to go after it, and they want to work with each other to find ways, and they want that challenge. And sometimes they don't get the food, and so what? Then you figure out a better way to do it next time, and so on and so forth. That's what they live for, not having their food dropped into their mouth. And prioritize the whale's needs over that of humans, which is something that you can't do in a marine park because people are coming and expecting certain things. You're expecting to see the animals. You're expecting to see them doing tricks. In the case of dolphins, you might even be expecting to ride on them. And that is why for the past 6 years, I have been involved in the sanctuary movement. In 2016, I founded the Whale Sanctuary Project. I looked around and I said, elephant sanctuaries, primate sanctuaries, dog and cat, big cat, bears, works for them. How come there aren't any sanctuaries for dolphins and whales? Nobody had ever done this before. So I got a bunch of people together who know how to do stuff like this, and we started planning it. And that's where the Whale Sanctuary Project came out of. Now, sanctuaries are a way to create a more positive future for those animals who are in the sanctuary. But as a teacher, I can tell you that I think it's just as important that it's a way forward for the next generation of kids, right? You want your children, your grandchildren, to grow up really understanding nature, respecting nature, having compassion for nature, and having their education about animals and nature being authentic. This year, was the culmination of 2 years of work with the National Aquarium in Baltimore, Merlin and Sea Life Trust, and the Whale Sanctuary Project, our organization, where we got together and we said, what would a whale sanctuary look like and what would it have to be? Because there's a lot of places that call themselves sanctuaries, but they're not. Like if you can ride on a dolphin, it's not a sanctuary. If they're breeding the animals, not a sanctuary. There's lots of things that happen. If they bring out a baby, fill in the blank, it's not a sanctuary, okay? So we wanted the public to be able to distinguish between true sanctuaries, authentic sanctuaries for whales and dolphins, and ones that just say they are. And also, we wanted to lay out what are the guidelines for accrediting these organizations. The Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries goes around to animal sanctuaries all over the world, and they go there, they visit, they have a checklist, and they accredit, and sometimes they don't, or sometimes a place loses its accreditation, but it's the only accrediting organization for sanctuaries. And now they have accreditation guidelines for cetacean sanctuaries. So I guess we're going to have to build them. What's an authentic sanctuary? Well, it's a place to live, not just a place to live, but a place to thrive. And I think that's really important, right? It's not enough to say that, oh, the whale he's eking out an existence. You want him to be thriving. You want the residents and their lifetime care to be the priorities. That's it. Not visitor experience, not this, that, or the other thing, but for once, it's about them. No performances, no breeding, no unnecessary research procedures. A promotion of life as natural as possible, and where you can do authentic education and conservation. Now, a sanctuary, and I'll show you, is still captivity. Don't kid yourself. But it is orders of magnitude better than a concrete tank by its very nature. If you look at marine parks versus authentic sanctuaries, and you look at the different benefits that people point to about animals in human care, well, feeding. Okay, SeaWorld and other places, they feed their animals. Very high quality fish. That's checked off, including sanctuaries. Veterinary care. Yeah, they have some really good vets. Well, guess what? Sanctuaries can have some really good vets too. Protection. Yeah, they're protected from ships and things like that. Well, the same is true in the sanctuary. But where you have to stop there for marine parks, you can continue on with sanctuaries, because then you can offer all of that in an ocean environment with lots more space, with stimulation, fish, organisms, plants, whatever the ocean offers, and autonomy and choice. So authentic sanctuaries are not a trade-off with marine parks. They offer a lot more, including all the goodies of human care, if you will. So I want to introduce you to our site. We spent 2 years in British Columbia and all over the place, and Nova Scotia and Washington, looking for a site to create a sanctuary for orcas and beluga whales. We finally found a very pretty site in on the northeastern shore of Halifax, about 2.5 hours north of Halifax, called Port Hilford. And if anyone's been to Nova Scotia, you know it's a beautiful, beautiful land. And we spent a lot of time meeting with people, asking communities, do you know a good bay where we can have a sanctuary for whales? Is this something that you'd like? And we'd look and get out of the car, and we'd stop the car and we'd scramble over the rocks. And could this be a place? Maybe, maybe not. We did that for 2 years. And we finally found it. This is it, Port Hilford Bay, Nova Scotia. And what you're looking at here is sort of from the out to the ocean. And let me see if I'm capable. Can you see that? Wow, okay. So there's the ocean out here, shoreline. And this is called Barashwa Islands. And that's very important because the animals will be living in all of this, and I'll show you a better picture of it. This island protects them from really bad weather. We've been there in 2-3 hurricanes. It's amazing, this Barashwa Island buffer zone. I mean, the wave heights are not that bad. So we know that this is a really special spot. This is the same thing, but from another point of view. Here's Barashwa Island coming out. And we would put a net here, and then come out of the tip here, all the way out to this area called Rocky Point. Now, not here, because those are too shallow. The actual space would be out here. And how much? 100 acres. Orders of magnitude greater than the biggest tank in the world. 14 meters deep. Filled with fish, plants, eels, crabs, tides. It's open ocean. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a mile-long net surrounding that 100 acres and provide a home for orcas and or beluga whales, some combination. We don't know who's coming yet. But so if it's orcas and belugas, they'll be separated. There's plenty of room. And this doesn't even do justice in terms of the vastness of what 100 acres is. But this is a net that's a mile long. If you were standing on the shore here, and there was a whale here, you wouldn't see him. That's why we were going to have a observation tower and all kinds of underwater cameras and lots of observational equipment. But these animals would be able to live their lives the way they want. We are still feed them. We're still going to take care of them. There'll be a veterinarian on staff. They'll be protected. But for the first time in their life, they will get to spend their days the way they want. They can chase fish. They can hang out with whoever they choose. No, they don't have to perform. Nobody's going to be gawking at them. And we have enough space for about 3 or 4 orcas and about 8 beluga whales, and still providing space for them. And the other thing is that, and what I'm really excited about too, is we're going to have underwater cameras and hydrophones. So you can go anywhere and get a live stream of what an orca or a beluga whale does when he's actually given the space to do what he wants to do. Imagine that. Just seeing a whale being a whale. And to me, that's really important because when kids want to understand who are whales, they need to find out authentically. They need to understand who a whale is. And the only way they can do that is by either learning about them in their own environment or seeing them in an environment that promotes their autonomy. So I want to introduce you to some of the possible candidates that we are thinking about for a sanctuary. We are hoping we'll be able to complete our sanctuary by the end of next year. We're right at the end of our permitting process. We've done all the environmental analyses. Boy, is it a tough road to hoe. Let me tell you, nobody thought it was going to take this long. But you know what? It is. There's all kinds of regulations and test upon test upon test. And we do what we have to do to put those nets in the water. And we've been talking with various facilities. So up top there is some beluga whales, Marineland, Canada. Marineland, Canada in Ontario, they have about 35 beluga whales. Can they spare a few? They are supposedly selling the property. I don't know what they're doing, but there's a lot of beluga whales there. And in Canada, the law is you can't breed them anymore. So they're stuck with them. And we would like to work with them and help them to bring at least some of these whales to the sanctuary where they can enjoy a semblance of a natural life. Now, below that, you see the family of orcas that I told you about at the beginning. Wiki Inuk Mona Nkiju. Mona passed away this week. So now we have 3, a mom and two others. They're a family. And we have extended a request to see if they will sit down and talk to us about, is there the possibility of bringing this family to the sanctuary? Because right now they're slated to go to Japan and they're going to be broken up. So the family's going to be broken up, and the mother is going to be sold off as a reproduction machine. So we're trying to see if there's a path forward for them to stay together and live a life that they deserve. What they really deserve is to be in the wild, but something better than what they have now. We're talking with folks in South Korea. There's 2 little beluga whale girls there, about 13 years old, Bella and Luby, and they would like us to take them. And so we've been talking with them for a couple of years about how that would happen. That's a long trip. But we know how to transfer these animals, and it's still possible that these 2 girls might come to us. There's also 3 belugas in Taiwan, and we have a member of our board who's very familiar with them, and they would like to bring them somewhere. And then there's 1 orca in Argentina named Shemenk, and he doesn't have any other orcas. I'm not sure if he's healthy enough or if he's even a viable candidate. But we want to leave him in there because we're thinking about him. If there's any path forward, we'd like to have him. So the fact of the matter is they need us. These animals need us to do something for them. It's not working for them. And they do too, because the kids that are coming up need us to show them a more compassionate path, a way to live more authentically with animals, a way to live respectfully with them, and they're counting on us. So I want to thank you for your time. I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Lori. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, right? Oh, okay, I got, okay. I'll try my best.
How many orcas are in the wild, and do they migrate?
Good question. So the question is, how many orcas are there in the wild and do they migrate? I mean, there are probably tens of thousands in the wild. We don't know exactly. Do they migrate? They definitely move around. Orcas are found in every ocean on the globe. So anywhere you go, there's orcas, and it's cold water, warm water, off New Zealand, off Iceland, off Canada, off Washington, et cetera, et cetera. They are a very cosmopolitan species, and every single group is a different community with a different dialect and a different cultural history.
Here we go, sir. You want to go first? Either one? Ladies first.
Okay, thank you. Orcas are really dolphins.
Yes.
And they're predators. How do you think it's going to work out putting other species of whales in, which sometimes they predate on?
Very good question. So yes, orcas are the largest dolphins. They're actually dolphins in the delphinid family. And some of them are predators. Now remember, in the wild, they can eat fish, squid, other marine mammals, porpoises. Again, it depends on their culture, what they eat. All of these orcas will not even know that a live fish is food. They will have to learn that because they have been fed by having dead fish dropped in their mouth. Now, if we have orcas and belugas, they will be in separate areas so that there will be no possibility of anything happening like that.
What's the percentage of orcas now in captivity that had been caught in the wild as, older than babies, where they could go back in the wild if you could find their families?
And that's a very good question. What percentage of orcas in captivity now were captured in the ocean? In the United States, there's only one left, and that's Corky. She's a member of the Northern Residents in British Columbia, and she was captured there when she was a baby. Tokitae was the last Southern resident. All the others have been born in captivity, and none of them would be candidates for going back because there's no back to go to. There is a sanctuary effort in British Columbia being created, and just in case there's a possibility that Corky can go back home. She would stay in the sanctuary, but she'd be in her natal waters.
Yeah, I want to thank you for being here today and educating us about the plight of these animals, and also for building them a sanctuary that at least some of them can go to and live more pleasant lives in the future. But as a former biological oceanographer, I'm as interested in wild populations of orcas and how their behaviors might be changing due to human activities. Yeah. In particular, In the last year, I've seen a number of reports coming from a population in the eastern Atlantic off of Portugal and Gibraltar that are attacking boats and in some cases sinking them. So can you tell us what you know about that and any other instances of human activity changing the wild population's behavior?
That's a great question. I mean, it's not like everything, it's not like everything's hunky-dory in the wild either. I mean, it's not, it's about the fact that they have at least the opportunity to live an authentic life in the wild. Most orca populations are doing extremely well in the wild. There's really only one that I know of that's having a hard time with their prey, and that's in the Pacific Northwest, and that's due to a lot of different reasons, including the fact that their culture is, we are the Chinook salmon eaters, and there are very few Chinook salmon left. So, now these guys in Portugal, this is like a gang of teenage orcas, and they go out, and what they do is they bump the boats, they might take the rudder apart, things like that. And I try to tell people, this is not an attack. It might seem like that to you, but believe me, if an orca wanted to attack you, you would know the difference. These, in my view, and I don't know this population, but in my view, these are teenage orcas doing what teenagers do. And I don't mean that facetiously, I mean that really. They're smart, they're energetic, they're exploring animals, they're curious, they like to play, they're cheeky, they're all those things. And this is fun for them. They're just having fun. And I hope people realize that, so that they realize that the animals aren't, this whole idea that, oh, revenge of the orcas, and that's garbage. I mean, these are just a bunch of orca teenagers doing what teenagers do. Seriously.
Mine's a follow-up on the same question. Being a cruising boater, I've read many well-documented stories of orcas ramming and sinking boats for no apparent cause, and that does concern me. I don't know how anybody would even begin to study that, but that has been well documented and really happens.
Yes. Now, orcas have rammed boats before, and like you said, it's difficult to study because when it happens, it just happens spontaneously. You can't do a study of it. Most of the time, when they do ram boats, there's either a reason, like you might be in the way of something important that they're doing, or they're just playing. But consider the fact that not a single human being has ever been killed by an orca in the ocean. And several people have been killed by orcas in tanks. Consider also the fact that when these baby orcas, the calves, were captured, taken away from their mothers and their pod, those pods never aggress towards the hunters, the capturers. Now, you can imagine an animal of that size mad at you. You're taking her baby away, and she could easily dispatch you if you're in the water. And it's never happened. So there are a lot of mysteries about these animals. Why they don't do certain things, why they do certain things. Sure, they've rammed boats before. There's probably a range of reasons why, but not a single human has ever been killed by a free-ranging orca.
I've always wondered, where I grew up in Venice, Florida, we had a theme park, Florida Land, We had a dolphin that lived in the wild, came every morning, led the boat up to Sarasota to pick up people, would bring them back. Then he'd come to the beach and play with us.
Yep.
And come back. And why they haven't developed more of that? I mean, he'd come into the tank, they could open the door, he'd swim in and with the captive dolphins and do tricks. But he loved to go to Sarasota, he'd just follow the boat or be in front of the boat, and then he'd bring them back. It was like 2 miles down to the beach. He'd come to the beach and play, and that was his life. I mean,
and he chose it, right?
He chose it. And he caught most of his own fish. Now, they'd give him some there, but he was out all night eating and doing whatever he wanted to do.
Yeah.
But some of them enjoy people. I mean,
yes.
The captive ones, when a hurricane came, it would flood their tanks. So like my neighbor who worked there would have a full-size dolphin in their swimming pool for a couple days. Then I worked for Dr. Busey, who was the first vet at Orlando SeaWorld before I went to vet school. And I was so amazed at how that when they had SeaWorld Cleveland, we used to bring all the critters down to Orlando and San Antonio. Part of them went there, but bringing them out, I mean, the killer whale, he just appreciated being petted when he got off the airplane and being sponged.
Yeah, I think that what you're talking about here is something really important, which are examples of individual whales authoring their own life. In other words, exercising their autonomy. Nobody trained them, nobody captured them, nobody confined them. That dolphin, that whale is just doing what he or she wants to do. And we think that, you know, those kinds of things, scenarios might be a way to, you know, get closer to something resembling a richer life for dolphins and whales who are currently now, you know, trapped in these concrete tanks. But yeah, lots of them make the decision to go on beluga whales, lone solitary beluga whales. They show up, they leave their group, they hang out for a while, and then they go somewhere else. And why they do this is just something that occurs to them. But yeah, they're very, very interesting animals. And yeah, that would be an open environment like that is something that could work under certain circumstances. Yeah.
I enjoy your speaking tonight. Thank you for coming. I do want to ask you, because I did hear, without you really going into great detail about it, but the crux of the situation is the American dollar. So because we have people who take these children and families to these marine parks, until that stops, you're not going to be able to help these animals. And whales migrate between 7,000 and 11,000 miles round trip, and when they migrate, they're constantly swimming. So as wonderful as it sounds to have a sanctuary, and you have a 1 mile net, a 5 mile net, I don't care what the net is, it's still not a natural situation for these animals. And the other problem is, you know, like you have cribbing in horses, you talk about, you know, these other things that these whales self-mutilation, and being in a tank. You know, anybody who has a swimming pool knows how difficult it is to keep the chemicals of that pool correct when you have 4, 5, 6 days of rain. So you have the leaching of the concrete, you have the constant feeding of the antibiotics. I mean, it's just basically cruel.
Was that a statement or a question? Do we have a question? Okay. Laurie, I don't know how you want to respond to that.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Y'all, we're going to be able to take one last question. And this gentleman has had his hand up for quite some time.
So are you confident that your netting will be sufficient to keep the whales and belugas on one side? Couldn't they just jump over it?
Yes, we are, and that's a great question. We always get that question. For some reason, well, first of all, belugas don't jump. So this will be a net that will go from just above the surface to the floor. Belugas don't jump, so they're not going to jump over it. And orcas can jump, but they never do. It's really interesting. There's something about their perception or their cognition. They don't like nets and barriers. They don't like to jump over things. So when you see in a marine park a dolphin performance or orcas, and they're jumping through and over, that has to be trained like crazy, because they don't want to do it. They don't even want to go through a gated area. They're kind of, what's on the other side, you know? So we don't think that that's going to be an issue. We will have 24/7 security and all kinds of contingencies just in case something happens. But I don't think that'll be an issue. It sounds counterintuitive, but yeah, they just don't jump over nets.
Okay, everybody, thank you. Let's thank Lori for
Thank
being
you.
here.